So I've logged 50 authoritarian-like actions since the 1st of December. So you've probably seen the debate around whether the US committed war crimes in its boat strikes. But today I'm going to cover 3 ways that the administration has advanced its anti-immigrant nationalist agenda that have gone under the radar, but you should probably know about. So let's start with immigration and visas. So in June, Trump imposed sweeping restrictions on people entering the United States if they came from 19 countries, which included Afghanistan, Iran, and Sudan. And this basically included both permanent and temporary migration, so it would include tourists. So that basically stopped new people coming in, but people who already had valid visas were allowed to enter the United States. At the end of November, you had those 2 members of the National Guard who were tragically shot in Washington, D.C., and 1 person has since died. And they were shot by an Afghan national who entered the US in 2021. Now, after that incident, Christina, who is Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, she said on social media that Trump should enact a full travel ban on every damn country that's been flooding our nation with killers, leeches, and entitlement junkies. And a couple of days after that, the Trump administration paused all ongoing immigration applications from those 19 countries. So people who were in the process of getting a green card or becoming a naturalized citizen or having their asylum applications assessed, all of that was just put on hold. And then anyone who already had a green card or had their refugee status approved was going to be re-reviewed by the administration. And what that essentially is collective punishment for the actions of one person and a crackdown on legal migration from what are mostly Muslim majority countries. And 2 days after that, so this is now the end of last week, Kristi Noem said on Fox News that the US is going to expand that list of countries to 30 or more than 30, but she didn't actually say which countries that was going to be. At the same time, the Trump administration has asked the State Department to start denying H-1B visas, which are for highly skilled workers. And they basically want to deny those visas where there's evidence that the applicant or any accompanying family member has been involved in censorship of free speech. And so how they're determining that is that they're going to be checking the social media and LinkedIn profiles of both the applicant and their family members for any indication that they've ever worked in misinformation, in fact-checking, content moderation, online safety, and so on. And really what I think that's about is that they want to weed out immigrants who might challenge the administration's narrative. So, these are all ways in which the administration has attacked or restricted immigration this week. The other thing that's happened is that the state of Minnesota has really come under attack. It's a Democrat-led state. And one particular aspect that's being used against it is that it has a large and vibrant Somali immigrant community. And that really stemmed from thousands of Somalis settling there in the early to mid 1990s because they were fleeing civil war in Somalia. And this includes Ilhan Omar, who came to the US as a refugee in 1995 when she was 12. She became a US citizen in 2000. And then she was elected as a Democrat congresswoman to Minnesota's 5th District in 2018. And she's been an outspoken critic of President Trump. And this matters, as you'll see. And so what is going on? So basically, in November, Trump ended what's called temporary protected status for Somalis in Minnesota. And that basically means it's become easier to deport them. And then last Tuesday, the administration announced a new ICE, so immigration enforcement operation in Minnesota, specifically aimed at arresting and deporting hundreds of undocumented Somalis in Minneapolis. And then in a press conference last week, Trump really upped the rhetoric and he referred to Somalis as garbage. And he particularly singled out Representative Ilhan Omar for attack. And he basically said, Ilhan Omar is garbage, she's garbage, her friends are garbage. So alongside this, there's been a different way of attacking Minnesota, which is that the Treasury Department is investigating tax fraud allegations in Minnesota, alleging that they may have been diverted to Al-Shabaab, which is kind of a militant terrorist group in Somalia. So Trump called Minnesota a hub of fraudulent money laundering activity under Democratic Governor Tim Walz. Now, you probably remember Tim Walz because he was Kamala Harris's running mate for vice president during the 2024 election. Now, it is true that many people have been convicted of fraud in Minnesota for targeting their welfare and housing programs, particularly during the COVID pandemic. And it's also true that some of those people convicted had been Somali immigrants. But there is no evidence that those defrauded funds were then sent to a terrorist group in Somalia. But that has kind of become a right-wing talking point, which Trump has been repeating. Now, the Minnesota governor, Tim Walz, says that those people who've abused the system in Minnesota have been prosecuted or are being prosecuted and jailed, and that effectively what the Trump administration is doing is demonizing a whole community based on the actions of a few. And then the final way the administration has targeted immigration in Minnesota is by threatening to withhold $30 million of federal highway funding from the state over what are called foreign truck driver licenses. And so what this is that in September, the administration significantly tightened the regulations around non-US citizens being allowed to drive commercial trucks. And that includes things like stricter visa rules. And it has since used those tightened rules to target primarily Democrat-led states with threats to withhold highway funding unless they comply with these regulations. And what's happened is that the states have generally responded by saying, well, we are complying. And Minnesota is doing exactly the same. So Governor Tim Walz said in a statement that Minnesota is complying with the new regulations. The last thing I want to cover in this part one is foreign policy. And really what happened was that last week, the Trump administration issued kind of a formal national security strategy paper that called, well, it did a lot of things, but some of the things it did is it called for European nations to take primary responsibility for their own defence. It baselessly accused the European Union of stifling political liberty. It warned that some NATO members were becoming majority non-European, by which I presume it means majority non-white, and said that the US should align with patriotic European parties, which is really code for European right-wing populist parties. What there wasn't of in the document was any criticism of Russia or Putin, or any acknowledgement that Russia poses a quite serious security threat to Europe. And I mean, in some ways, this document isn't news, right? It just codifies formally all the various criticisms that the administration has been making of Europe ever since Trump took office, including J.D. Vance's famous speech in the spring in Munich. But it is still shocking to see in black and white that the official kind of US government position now is this blatant disdain for Europe's liberal democracies and an open support for far-right populist movements, some of which are really blatantly neo-Nazi. So these are all stories that I just think haven't reached the front pages this week, but are really important. And then in part two, I'll also cover things that you might have missed in the realm of science and health and civil rights. So tune in for that.